and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison Adams, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our amazing community members and a special guest, which you will hear from in just a moment. And so today we're talking about learning, and we're going to start off with a quick word association. So everyone's going to introduce themselves and pick their 1 to 3 words that they associate with learning. And Thanasi, you can go ahead and get us started off.
Oh, God. My name is Thanasi. I'm 18. I am from New York City. I guess the 3 words is outdated, foundational, and individualized. Those are the 3 words I think that come to my head.
Oh wait, am I supposed to go? Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm 17 from Vancouver, Washington. When I think about learning, think about self-directed and curiosity. I feel like that's like the only true version of learning, not what school feeds us. Yeah.
I would be happy to go next. Hi, my name is Chabu. I am 19 and based out of Toronto. And my word of association for learning is pleasant when unconventional. It can be really like exciting and fun, but again, kind of speaking to Ashley and Thanasi, only when it's kind of done differently and unconventionally.
Hi, my name is Maryam. I'm 17. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and my 3 words are school, knowledge, and self. School, because I feel like that's a lot of people's like first introduction to learning. Knowledge, obviously you're learning and you're getting knowledge, and then self, because I feel like that moment when you start to learn for yourself rather than like through school is like a really critical time. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Daryl, 16 from Orlando, Florida. 3 things I would describe learning would be digital, technical, and bite-sized, I guess. Digital, because of course everything's digital now, and that's probably going to stay that way for a long time. Technical, because I came to a realization today that technical education, like non-college education, technical college, getting certifications, things like that, are probably going to be more useful than a college degree or any other liberal arts degree you could think of. Today, I actually just got certified by my school's technical college in Adobe Premiere, and they sent me all these emails about opportunities than what I would have ever gotten with any liberal arts program. So it's definitely opened up my eyes to technical education and bite-sized, because a lot of us pretty much only learn through TikTok now, and it's bite-sized information. So, those TikTok tutorials really do come in clutch.
Hi guys, my name is Josiah Caterino. I'm a senior at Verdigris High School in Oklahoma. And the 3 words that come to mind when I think of learning are application, contemplation, and curiosity. I feel like application is very important because without applying what you learn in life, you're simply hearing words you're not doing. I think contemplation is really, really important in learning because I think it's necessary actually to know why you're doing what you're doing when you're applying what you learn. And to make all of that necessary, and to make all of that possible, you have to have curiosity in the first place. I think learning that is sanctioned is almost always like less than half as fruitful as learning that is non-sanctioned.
Julia, you're up.
I don't know. Those are my 3 words. I'm like all over the place right now. I just hopped in.
That's actually brilliant. Very Socratic.
Yes, I'm sticking with that. That's where I'm at today.
Wait, Julia, who are you?
I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old and I live in Pennsylvania. That's I always
Okay, my turn. I'm Tom. I'm 34, and I live in New York. My 3 words are improvement, since that is obviously very foundational to the purpose of learning. You are trying to improve in some sort of subject matter. Betterment, which I think is a little bit different than improvement. I think it's more of the goal of why you are trying to improve is to better your position in life for some sort of specific area. And then third would be community, because I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of what you are going to learn are things that either someone else has already learned before or has sort of collectively been developed. A lot of what happens in education is reliance on what came before you. And everything we learn is really a collective build. So I think community is good to keep in mind.
Love that, Tom. Hey, I'm Gary. I'm calling in from Chicago. Yes, I'll say under 30. Thanasi. My words are building off of Tom, fun with friends, or funner with friends. Is that a word? Funner. But I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, I don't think funner is a word, but I would say freedom and responsibility, because I think education should be about freedom and choice. It's been established that everyone learns more when they're actually learning things that they want to, but that also comes with a responsibility, like to have that choice. So yeah. And now we can get into the actual conversation. So if anyone has a question or a provocation they want to pose, I'll write it down and then we can all get started.
I have one. I guess I can kick us off. Given everything that we've said about learning, does a traditional school environment, so not college, but like everything other than college, work for Gen Z and younger? Even millennials too. We can loop them in.
No. Aggravated by virtual learning, where my school forces me to follow the regular school day schedule, even though I'm at home in pajamas. So every day I wake up at 7:20 a.m. to attend a class where the teacher barely shows up half the time, and do assignments through Google, because that's basically what a teacher does, is has us do and calls them research assignments. So traditional school environment doesn't work. It really should be just personal motivated. I'm sorry, I got confused by the chat. Most education that sticks with you are personally motivated. Like when you go through Wikipedia rabbit hole or YouTube rabbit hole, being forced necessarily to do research on something won't really stick with you, because you'll forget about it by the next period or as soon as you hit that submit button. So having something that, puts the seeds in you and you go explore that yourself, instead of having you try and find the seeds and then explore it yourself, is a better environment than the traditional school environment.
I don't think it will work for younger generations more so even than ours right now. One of those reasons is, of course, physical activity. Kids, have supercomputers with more computing power than, Apollo 18, or I forget the specific number of the rocket that went to the moon, in their hand with a current iPhone. And, we're seeing children, sit and, play video games for hours on end when they come home from school, and they're, sitting alone in school for, 6-7 hours doing, menial tasks that don't really engage or conjure up their curiosity or their brain activity towards learning. And a lot of teachers' response to this is to advise parents to, put their children on Adderall or other medications like that, so that they can stay calm and focused throughout the day. but I feel like encouraging more open learning and physical activity through school will allow kids to be able to sit down and stay focused when it's actually time to study and do other things of that nature. Because right now we're seeing, the cognitive, what would you refer to as an attention span of younger children decreasing year after year. And I think we have to focus on counteracting that as soon as we can. And the rise of technology and the availability of instant entertainment, I think, counteracts that. So
I also think, I think there's a problem when you say like traditional school environment and everyone's brains goes to like a four-walled classroom or like Zoom. Like, even just the implication that like there is one school environment that works for every kid, like, is totally like not true. And like, because traditional school is designed for one type of kid, like, I don't think it currently works for our generation. I don't think it'll work for younger generations. Kind of what Josiah touched on, I think there is just a need for a lot more types of school environments, environments like in nature, like in the real world, just different scenarios where people are invited to learn and not just like stuck in the classroom.
I think that the education system has a lot to learn from other industries, in the sense that like other industries understand that you need to innovate in order to stay relevant and important to the people who participate and engage. And I don't think schools have been really good about that. Like, the traditional school environment is very similar to the one that like my parents grew up in. But they did not have this like influx of information overload and like so many different opportunities to like spend their time and energy and learn in their own ways. So I don't think that it works for younger generations, in the sense that they're not working towards making it feel relevant or important to students, which also speaks to like an underlying theme of just assuming that it's a necessity that students have to engage in. So like, why would we want to invest time in like making it something they would want to do, if that makes sense?
Yeah, on that point, I was reading this book, Livewire, that I've been talking about for like a week now, or maybe two. It's very good, but it was talking about how the brain learns with a lot, like you need to associate meaning with whatever you absorb as knowledge in order for you to actually learn it. So like Serena Williams will be really good at tennis if she practices for 10,000 hours because it has meaning in her life. But if someone who hates tennis is like forced into tennis by their parents, they're not going to learn it because it has no meaning to their life. And I think that like, because we can Google a bunch of things now and like solve dinner table arguments and learn just because of Google, I don't think, memorizing facts has much more meaning than other mundane tasks. And I think that we need to switch to something that is meaning. I don't know what has meaning and what's meaningful to young people, but
yeah, to that point, like everything, how we learn in school right now, like we can do that on our own with Google and everything on the internet, but something that we like need to move towards is like actual application. And that's not like applying what you learn on a test. It's like real life experience. And that's like, even in college, like my internships, I would say out of all my 4 years of classes, like I learned 20 times more in my internships, and like those were the most valuable things. So actual experience and application of the things in real life.
Thanasi, when you first asked this question, I thought of it in two different ways, and it strikes me that all of you have actually responded to one of those, which is the actual function of how classrooms work, which is to say, not asynchronous, everyone sitting at their desk absorbing from a teacher. I was kind of thinking also just literally what is taught within school environments these days, which no one is, some of you have kind of alluded to. And I'm curious if you guys think that the traditional curriculums that exist today, math, science, English, history, etc., are as relevant for what you are looking for in a traditional K-12 education as, say, other skills. And if not, are you guys actively using some of these websites? If it's like a code website or language learning website of language that's not taught at your school to actually fill in these gaps? I'm curious if you guys use these kind of things.
I mean, I think that's a great question. And it's something that in school, I used to complain about all the time, like, when am I going to use this? When am I going to use this? And unfortunately, I have not been proven wrong in terms of a lot of different things that I have been complaining about, like when I'm going to use, because in like my school, with like the math track that I'm on, I like take a math class and then I'll take the AP test for it and then I'll like bounce and I will literally not remember anything. And I have friends in the class now and they'll be like, oh, could you help me out? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I just genuinely do not remember any of this. And so to that extent, I definitely think that there's like a disconnect between what I'm actually learning in school and like what'll be useful for me. And I have had to kind of go outside of like my school environment to learn like things that I'm actually passionate about, like learning languages, because I'm like really interested in connecting with different cultures and other people. And even though I can explore languages at school, just the way that they set it up makes it so that it's not even about speaking with other people, which is like practically applicable to me. It's literally just about writing. And so I think there's a lot of disconnect with that. But even in terms of like subject matter that isn't even offered, like a lot of the things that I kind of wish that my school would teach are about like things that I feel like I need growing up, like money and like taxes and like all that stuff. And I'm just like, I have no idea how any of this works. And I feel like school and like the current education system definitely doesn't prepare you for like leaving the education system. It kind of just prepares you to continue in the education system to go to like college, and it doesn't really prepare you for anything besides that. So I definitely think there is a lot of disconnect there.
And of course, being an active citizen, since we are doing a Civics Unplugged evening here.
I think like maybe it's not necessarily these core subject areas like English, math, history. I think just a lot of the structure affects it. So I think of, I told this story at a couple treks ago when we were talking about high school, but I just recently transitioned to online school. And so I'm doing like an online world history class. And I'm sitting here thinking like, this is so boring. Like I'm not enjoying this at all. But in my free time, I'm watching documentaries and I realize, oh my gosh, I'm watching documentaries about the exact same topics. And so it's like, why was it not as appealing to me when I was doing it at school? And I think it's so much about choice and like freedom to explore and dive into what you want to about particular topics. So I'm not sure it's necessarily like the exact subject areas, but it's more like it's not as applicable because we don't get to choose. And then also like in a classroom, we're not being given the tools to like kind of like analyze how it can be implemented and relevant to our lives.
Yeah, I feel like when people like I had a conversation with my dad and he got really mad at me because I was like, we don't really need the 4 core subjects past 5th grade. And I think school is a great place to like start your exploration and dive, but because the 4 core subjects are like foundational to pretty much everything that you could want to be interested in. But I think that there's a real drain after that where kids just feel like they don't have the permission to be curious anymore about anything, and they can only like enjoy like freshman bio, which by the way I failed, but they can only enjoy freshman bio and and not really like if they like genetics, you have to wait 4 years to go to college and then maybe you can take a class if you get in, like stupid stuff like that. And then schools just don't have the resources to provide opportunities for deep diving, and you have to be super motivated to do it yourself, which is also super unfortunate.
I'll add by saying that the answer to this question for the most part is no. Like relevancy is very limited, and I think that I would appreciate a perspective that Thanasi is proposing where like you kind of just end all the core subjects at 5th grade. Because for me, like I was super immersed in school, like had a great time, learned what I did and like performed well. But for the most part, it was all irrelevant, even though I took a lot of like social issue related courses. But it wasn't until I spent more time here at CU that I began challenging myself to use some of like the core concepts that I learned in those classes that felt unrelated in these spaces. And so like building connections between like what I learned in physics in grade 10 to like democracy reform and systems thinking seems kind of impossible, but it's actually, there's more relevancy than I initially would have thought. And I keep finding connections the more time I spend thinking that way. So I do think that it has the capacity to like enrich what you're invested and interested in, and also plays a major role in like allowing you to explore your likes and dislikes. But in terms of just like relevancy, not to the extent where like it deserves that much time in like high school and so on and so forth.
So it seems to me that a lot of you guys are talking about the idea of experiential learning is obviously, and I totally agree, being a more valuable learning experience. The trick there in formal education is then you kind of lose the ability to grade a student if there's not kind of a uniformity in the experience. So I'm curious, again, what you guys think about grades and how we kind of evolve past that and what a post-grade educational experience looks like.
So as an alternative to grading, as long as you demonstrate mastery in the topic, it could be a pass-fail system. It doesn't necessarily have to be numerical, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, whatever grading system your school uses. So a pass-fail system. They're currently using it because of COVID right now in many schools and universities to help with that disadvantage, including my college. Instituting a pass-fail system, it prevents people from developing, maybe depression because they were 1 point off from getting an A. As funny as that sounds, that's an actual issue that happens with a lot of kids that have parents that expect them to be perfect. And having a pass-fail thing, or even maybe a mastery level, can help demonstrate that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Ashley speak to this because I think when people think of alternatives to grade-based or like traditional learning, they think project learning. And Ashley had a really good perspective on why that's probably not as effective.
Why project-based learning isn't effective? Well, I mean, I guess like I've just never really liked project-based learning at school because a lot of times I didn't get to choose the projects, and I guess I just don't see a lot of point in like investing my time in projects if it's not connected to like improving, like if it doesn't directly improve like the system of myself or a system in the real world, like in my community that I care about or that I want to build. So I mean, like, yes, I think it is important to, I mean, like, being able to measure stuff is incredibly important. Like, if you can't measure it, it's not going to be prioritized in schools because principals need to like demonstrate growth. That's how like they get funded and whatever. But yeah, I definitely agree with like, I don't know, more portfolio based stuff. I guess I also think about like, I don't quite know. So I'm taking classes at Reed College right now. I don't quite know how the grading system works, but like we get grades, but we don't access our grades. Like they don't tell us what our grades are. Like it's really weird. Like Reed has this emphasis on like wanting to like measure academic achievement through like intellectual growth and like self-assessment. Like they're really big on like Socratic seminars and whatever. And like a conventional letter grade is provided, but like it's not provided to students like, I don't know, until like I don't even know what my grade is in that class I just took last semester. Like I don't know how to find out, which like is kind of bad, but like
Yeah, I mean, I guess stuff like that eliminates the mental health aspect. It's just I feel like we've entrenched such an odd path for kids that's like and principals and administrators of like all based on letter grades and number grades, and like all the toxic effects of that are really showing. And I also wonder, like I have no clue what we can measure other than letter grades, because school needs to be accessible for everybody and it needs to be a standardized system so that everybody has equal opportunity, but it also needs to be super individualized. So is the solution modularity? That's the only thing my brain goes to, is like an ultra modular education system where everybody has access to the same pieces, but they put them together in a different way.
But you know what?
Oh, someone go.
Okay. Touching on what Ashley said earlier about group projects, I think this would be one of the rare instances in standardized education where it is too much to ask for both. I think that it is really important to encourage kids to work together and learn team building skills and learn how to communicate with their peers. But I don't necessarily think academics is where you want to encourage that as much as it would be post-academic, like extracurriculars, sports, things like that. Or unless you would have certain classes where the entire semester of the class or in the entire year is dedicated towards group learning, and you knew prior to signing up for that class or enrolling in that class that it was going to be group learning. I think that it's like we mentioned, earlier that, it's very important for the American education system to transition and, kind of just segue into more individualized learning. But at the same time, I don't think we need to also encourage group learning, because then you lose that individuality that I feel we need to push for,
I will say that there's a couple of like assumptions I might want to call out here about the conversation around grades. I think that it's important to like mention the fact that like it is leading towards like mastery or understanding your progression, and there is a need for like knowing, like having a tangible way of seeing how much progress you're making. That being said, I think it was Josiah who mentioned this, but like, is mastery actually what we're in pursuit of? Can someone actually master anything? I think you can have like an ongoing commitment to like continuously learning about a subject. And so much of like school revolves around like arriving to a conclusive amount of understanding about a subject, which is like not beneficial for anyone. And grades like there's validity involved. And again, like knowing how much progress you've made. But I will say that it might be important to just like have really individualized learning, and the idea that like we can somehow create a standardized system that accommodates everyone and addresses all these concerns doesn't feel feasible to me. Then again, those are just my thoughts.
I have another question to pose, if that's all right with everybody. Talking about innovative ways of learning, what things from brick and mortar learning would you like to see better implemented into virtual learning?
Like things that work well in
brick and mortar settings. How do you think they could be implemented better into a virtual setting?
Things that worked well like pre-pandemic.
Yep. COVID doesn't exist in this question.
The petty part in me wants to say nothing, but I think that there are like a lot of. I maintain that most of school's purpose is to socialize you and make you so that you can understand how to be a functioning human, and you don't just like stare into space when you talk to another person. And so I think that we've totally, like, not to sound like I know everything and no one else like does in the actual education department of anything, but we've like totally gotten rid of the social aspect of school just for the knowledge aspect of school, which hasn't worked in real school. So there's no point that we're doing it in digital school. And then we're like, okay, well, no time for socializing. Go back into your social distance hole for another 6 months and study geography. And that just seems so stupid.
I think it's interesting because we're talking about, I really think that's a valid concern, Thanasi, but we're talking about individualized learning, but can you make it in such a way that like learning is individualized, but everyone is still kind of like you can have those social interactions? And I think that the answer maybe like on the surface level might be no, or it would probably just be different, because I think the idea that like we all have to be learning the same thing to kind of like be united by it is like a false assumption. I think it would be really cool to see a learning environment where maybe people are all focusing on the same sort of subject but learning different things, and they can really bring like a bunch of different things to the table. I know that that's very vague, but I think that something like that, like we should like change the way that we see like or the way that we think about what people have to learn and how they interact with each other in that process.
So think about like your Juntos, cool cats. You're living life. You're learning a lot, and you bring to your Junto, your weekly Junto, and Tom and Josiah. Um, Junto is basically just like a pure accountability learning group that meets like once a week. Well, you're gonna be in one for the fellowship, which is gonna be cool. But everyone is going on about on their learning journeys, whether they call it that or not. And if you happen to be talking about whatever feels meaningful to you that week, you're going to be sharing what you've been learning. And we've seen just the good stuff that happens from people actually getting excited about this sharing process, which actually inspires other people's learning journeys as well.
So that strikes me as what is supposed to be the role of an advisor within K-12 specifically, and except that when I was in school, I didn't have that kind of relationship with my advisor. I would meet, once a semester, and he'd look at my grades and say, "You're doing a good job," or something like that. But I'm curious if anyone else on here still in high school or from your high school experience, was there more of an effort by the advisor to be playing that kind of role and really being your kind of guiding hand throughout, cross discipline throughout high school, or was that just a totally wasted role?
I sort of have that relationship with my guidance counselor, but that's only because I'm in an advanced student program. If you're not like that honors accelerated student, you're pretty much left in the dust at my high school, and you have little to no contact with your guidance counselor unless you're failing, which they totally expect unless you do advanced accelerated courses. Part of that is an issue with me because we're a Title I school. We're like majority minority, and a lot of kids are intimidated by that. But that's for another trek. Maybe inequalities in education. I can't English today. And they are very limited to what they can do without referring you to another person. So if you talk to them about personal issues at home, they'll refer you to a social worker, and that social worker will probably refer you to like child services or whatever. And if you're having issues with your grades, you'll probably get referred to like some tutoring service that doesn't really prioritize you. And then your grades get even more worse, and you get thrown into remedial classes, and you have no future anymore. So it's very limited as to what you can talk about with your advisor without it turning into something more, because of mandating requirements, reporting, etc.
Yeah, regulations, liability, etc.
I think what's like unique about the contributions of a Junto is the fact that everyone's your peer. So there's no need to like almost like guard your language, or there are things that I like struggle to articulate. So I can kind of spout nonsense for a few minutes, and my Junto will like trudge through it with me. And we can talk about essentially anything, both the good and the bad. So I think that like advisory in the education system, there's just like too many roles that they have to play, including like supporting you academically, potentially supporting you emotionally and socially, and then also doing that for an insane amount of people all at once. So I think that like when it comes to can they make an effort to play a guide in the education, not necessarily. I feel like there's too many things associated with that title to actually effectively achieve even one of the objectives that's involved.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Considering my school has a 500-to-1 student to counselor ratio, each student gets like an average like 30 minutes with their counselor every year, and that is definitely like not enough to build any type of meaningful relationship. And so then like counselor time becomes like a privilege that only certain students have. Like I'm pretty sure my counselor like only knows a couple of kids at school, like like the really high achieving ones, or like, yeah, like that's so crazy, like Daryl's numbers. But like, but I will say like it is so incredibly important to have someone to guide you. Like even like I guess for me, I just feel really lucky that I had, just so many like teachers who really championed like my journey. Um, like in my freshman year, I like literally took classes that all connected with each other. Like I skipped all of the English classes and took like a seminar class in freshman year. And I did like my seminar project on like my human geography class, and my human geography class tied to my environmental science and biology classes. And like literally everything just lined up, but that was only because I was able to like skip certain classes or like get out of certain requirements to make things line up, because otherwise it won't line up by itself.
Yeah, the AP teachers in my, or the AP students in my school had 1,000 kids a grade, so they got like one. All the AP kids got one, and then we all got like the rest. But what I found funny is like, and I only realized this recently after reading Noam Chomsky, where he talks about like the journalists, no matter how good-hearted they are just a arm of the system that they work in. And I think the counselors are the same thing. Like my counselor was such a super sweet dude, like really loved his job. But he also he was like, you're going to fail if you take a gap year, and you should go to college, and like your grades are shit and you can't not take a gap year because we have an 100% to college ratio. And if you ruin that, they'll expel you. Like, and it wasn't, did he say that because it was a bad person? But no, but he's stuck within the system. And I think that kids need to seek out, like I found another teacher who I like saw as a mentor, right? But that was just naturally unlucky. And I think a lot of kids don't get the privilege to have that. Because I think that the goal of the education system in general is not to give kids like mentorship and let them guide their own path. It's to like push them in a certain direction so that we don't have to deal with them anymore.
I think what I don't know if the viewers can see, but Gary pointed out something like really, really important in the chat, that, you know, if you haven't had an advisor or like, you know, someone, a counselor of some sort in your life, you may not think it's important for younger people to have one. And I can relate to that a lot personally, because I'm one of the, to describe myself, I'm pretty self-determined. I've never needed someone to tell me that I needed to study for me to study. I always set my own plan, my own goals, and, you know, follow them because I wanted to reach them. And I just don't have an issue with that. But I know a lot of people that need that guidance in that direction that they can't necessarily muster from themselves, but they have the ability to output that energy if they just have someone, you know, to help guide them and let that energy loose, if, you know, so to speak. So I think it really is important for people to have counselors and a guide in their education, but I don't necessarily always think that that's going to come from the person that is supposed to give that role, you know, because as Ashley said, you know, the ratio is, for her, is like 500 to 1 at her school. You're not going to get quality time with a counselor or you know, someone from a position of power like that to really inspire you to apply yourself. So I think it's important to have someone to look up to and to guide you in your education, but I don't think those people are always going to be where you think you're going to find them, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. Wait. Okay, I was just gonna say, I agree. Like, I think that like college counselors are like the only advisors that are like in my school, and I don't know agenda, if that makes sense. Like, they're not in it for your well-being, they're more in it to make sure that like the school looks good, or like you get into the best college you can get into, which is like kind of problematic, but it also like still is ensure your well-being. Then like people don't necessarily feel comfortable going to them, and like, you know, they're not really going to be as like an academic advisor as like you might necessarily like want to have as a mentor in your life. So I don't really know that college counselors are the people that you could go to, but like it is still like really helpful to have a mentor, but like I don't know where people would get that if they weren't involved in like organizations like CU or like things like.
It's a great point. I mean, to to a lot of people's points, the role of the person says a lot about what they're actually going to do for you. And college counselor, already in the names, is like you're optimizing for getting kids into college, but in particular, the like the school district's definition of what getting into college means, right? And whatever success related to that means. It's not help kids find their most optimal place in the world where they're happiest, getting paid well, and like learning a lot, feeling meaning, like their life is meaningful. It's just this narrow definition of this narrow like objective. So I guess this is the classic systems pathology.
And in line with the idea of like classic system pathology, so much of the experiences that I'm hearing about, and even my own, are like contingent on some kind of privilege. Like you have to have like a really great connection with your counselor for them to feel the need to spend more time and attention on you, or like have great classroom performance to strike up a dynamic with a teacher who could be a mentor to you. Like so much of it is contingent on like accidental moments of magic, to the point where like the things that were great about the education system are hard to, you know, create widespread. Because I know that the reason why I was able to like lean on support from my counselor and like get certain exceptions or inquire about different things to like make my time there more useful was completely based on the fact that like I knew how to have a funny conversation with her first, and like felt really comfortable in spaces talking to adults like that. And that was what led to that being successful, and had very little to do with like me, my abilities, or my personality, or anything like that. Which makes me really concerned too, because those students who do need those advisor roles may not have those like natural inclinations for having conversations with adults like that. And that means that those who need it the most don't have access to it.
Yeah, Chabu, what's funny about that is like the kids who are getting access to the counselors and these, I guess, people in advisor roles are the ones that probably need it the least. I mean, not to say that like it should be like we should have a scarcity mindset about like only a certain amount of kids get attention, but like in the system, if it's going to work like that, how it is now, like honestly, the kids who can't, who don't know how to like, you know, strike up those conversations or aren't doing really well in their classes, they're the ones who probably need support the most. And so it's kind of like working in the opposite way that it should. I mean, I guess like, again, like I said, shouldn't have to be scarcity at all, but if it is, it's working in the opposite way.
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind, and maybe it's a question, like, is how do we systematize prioritizing like the whole kid focus? Or I know that's like a very charter schooly language, but like, we make a system where instead of feeling the forces of like I need to get kids into college and I need to do this, it's like I need to make sure that like Madison is happy and joyful and has purpose, or Gary is, you know, at Google, like stuff like that.
I mean, I guess like the first thing I think about is that right now the school system's like strategy for dealing with students is like, I mean, even if you look at our disciplinary policies, like if someone isn't doing good, like we kick them out of school, like we just like don't care about them anymore. We like, and like, how is that supposed to make someone like better? Like the problem is schools, like, yeah, like they don't even care about the parts of us that are not like academic-y. Like, I don't know, but I feel like we need better disciplinary systems that consider like the whole child.
This situation reminds me of something. I'm an aspiring economics major, and I was reading an economics book by a University of Chicago professor, and they talked about a study that they did where there's a big thing among a lot of conservatives support the idea of school choice, right? The idea that, you know, if you don't like the school system in your district, you can, you know, choose to commute to another district to go to school. And this is only encouraged when the taxes of the community stay within the community for the education. I know New York doesn't do that anymore, but some other big states still do that. And what they found is kids that had parents that were opting for them to move schools in the Chicago school district, if they were denied the right to move schools and stay in the school that they did not want to be in, they were still found to have done just as well as their peers that were opted and allowed to move to a better school district, or what they considered better. And what I think that highlights is that kids that are motivated and parents that are motivated for their kids to succeed are not the ones that need the intervention in the first place, because as we have seen, they're going to succeed either way because they put an emphasis on education. I think we need to focus more of our resources towards the kids that aren't like me and aren't like most of the people here and aren't self-motivated to prioritize learning. I think that it's the kids that don't have that sense of direction that we need to focus our resources and channel our materials into, so that they can thrive.
So Josiah, I would ask, isn't that probably what we've been trying to do for like 100 years? Trying to channel more resources, well, not all the time, right? But like, I think we've been throwing a lot of firepower, right? Like institutional firepower at a lot of people that are kind of underperforming. And I wonder if, like, almost by design, the fact that people don't trust the institution, almost no matter what the institution gives certain kids that don't trust institutions, it won't be well received. So I guess I wonder is like, who can actually light the spark, right, for a lot of kids that aren't feeling inspired by their schools.
Sorry.
I think that's almost just as important as a question of how do we make like an education system better.
My argument would be that we weren't actually doing that. We were saying we were doing that. There's this thing, I think I've told Madison about this before. I feel like I mention it just about once a week. It's called the systems theory. I don't know the exact name for it, but I think that's just, the headline for it. Where the purpose of a system is not what it says it's supposed to do, but what it actually does. And we're seeing in cities like Baltimore where, the higher ups, the counselors and the principals are getting six-figure salaries base in the Baltimore school system, which is one of the most expensive in our entire nation, because I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to Baltimore. I sure have. It is, the inner city it's in pain. And I think that a lot of the money that's going there is being thrown there, but it's not being allocated correctly. And that happens in our, I don't want to segue into foreign policy, but that happens a lot in our foreign policy as well, particularly in, African nations and things like that, where we're giving them a lot of money, but we're not showing them how to allocate that money correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just the issue is upstream of pretty much everything is like education, or just we're pumping out leaders that went through the same system that the leaders before them went through, and then they kind of just assume that there's no other option and they think in the same way. And like, I think that, financial empowerment to school districts is a whole nother level of how we get out of this mess. Also, investing in like technology that makes it easier to be a teacher. Like, how are we still on Zoom after 8 months of Zoom school? It's like, I think that we're trying to your point, Josiah, is like we're trying to pour money into a failing solution instead of pouring money into creating new solutions. And I don't think that's what's going on in like foreign policy, but I do think that's what's going on in education.
I just wanted to add real quick, since I don't know how much time we have left, and I just wanted to get this out there. I've loved listening to everything you guys are saying, and you are totally on with all the points that are being made here. But I do just want to say, as someone who has been kind of working in the education world, Thanasi said I was a venture capitalist, and I have worked specifically in education technology. And I can tell you definitively, things are so much better than they were 10 years ago, even within K-12. So the improvement that you guys are looking for, it's happening. It's just obviously a slow train, and it's being led by old people who don't know what the fuck they're doing. Other than that, we are improving. So I just think that there's been like a lot of kind of negative thoughts about the American K-12 world in this discussion, but I actually think there is a lot of reason for optimism. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to transition onto reflection. It actually reminds me of something that one of our fellows said at a last conversation, when she said that it's really discouraging to look at things if you think about where you are now and how far you have to go. But if you look at where you are now and how far you've come within a certain period of time, like 10 years, it becomes a lot more encouraging. And so I think that highlights that really well. And so I'm going to send the link to the notes that we've been taking in the Zoom chat so that you all can look over them and just shout out your reflection. I would say that what really resonated with me, what Thanasi just said right there about we shouldn't just be pouring money into failing solutions, we should be creating new ones. And then also the whole idea of like, how do we make an education system that allows people to create individual paths that work best for them, but also not take out what is already working in the education system or what a lot of people perceive as the benefits, like the social aspect.
I think the one thing that came to me from what Tom just said is that, when you ask a bunch of people who went through like a shaky system and then have no connection to it anymore, like all of us are either seniors or graduating high school, like you have no connection to your 8th grade classroom, right? Like we're always going to have such like violent first thoughts and reactions to it. And I think that also probably influences education conversations across the board. And it's just something really interesting that I've just noticed.
I will say that I have two kind of takeaways from this conversation. One, the like topic of the trek was learning, and there's something really informative about the way that like collectively we interpreted that topic, and it became a conversation about the education system and like very little to do with how we engage with learning outside of that context. And I think that just speaks to the fact that like it's hard to have a conversation about learning without talking about school, because it's the only space where we have a lot of evidence to draw from, which is something to look into and be concerned about. Second to that, I also think that it's interesting that like Tom talked about the fact that there are efforts that are being poured into, and it's heartbreaking to know that like there's so much disconnect between like the students who are like seeking support and then the people who are providing the support. Having a level of awareness that like there is someone out there that's like investing in this and putting forth their best step makes it easier to like kind of walk through the system knowing that there are faults but they're being worked on. And it makes me wonder if there's a way to kind of bridge that gap between those who are seeking support and those who are providing it.
Yeah, I mean, like that idea of kind of connecting the learners and the people that are shaping the system, it could apply to a single school or even a single classroom. And I think that is something to, like, I guess I wonder how often any of you have been in an environment where you've been asked like to give candid feedback on how the learning experience was, and to help improve it, um, and even just get updates on like how is the teacher or the principal or the school district trying to improve the learning experience. I think that would really help improve the trust between the learners and um, the other people.
I think, just to reflect real quick, I think one thing to kind of add on to what Gary said, I think one way we can change how school districts measure how well their students are doing in school is abolishing state testing, to where you're marginalizing a student's success just by a test. Because I think that if kids will be able to better reflect on how well they're learning, and you're able to analyze how well your students are learning if you can assess them individually rather than over a standard that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of every individual child.
So the topic of like individualized or choice-based learning was coming up a lot, especially in the beginning. I feel like right now how the education system is, like at 18, people don't even feel prepared to pick like their path or their major. Obviously due in large part to the education system, but also due in part to like human nature, not wanting to be put in a box. So kind of reflecting on all of that, I guess I kind of leave with the question, like, how can we approach trusting kids with more open-ended learning or individual paths instead of standardized learning?
I guess like my question would be like what, I don't know, because like we talk a lot about like kids needing to be self-directed. What's the balance between like offering direction and freedom?
Yeah.
And like I think a lot of that, I like tying back to like the very beginning about talking about community. Um, I think a lot of what direction could be provided by like by your peers, right? And like in like communal learning spaces.
I think like going off of what Ashley was saying, I think my question is kind of how can you even approach. Oh, okay. It says my internet connection is unstable, so I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but just let me know. Okay. So how do you even approach like implementing these sorts of processes with like group learning or like peer learning into a school system that like is already failing us so much, and is it even worth it? Like, I mean, can it only be done with like a complete overhaul, in which case that's kind of problematic too, because like those sorts of things take a lot of time. And so I think about like juntos and how successful they are, and like how much learning happens in just like once a week with like 1 hour, and I like wonder how we can incorporate that into school. But it is hard to kind of introduce these sorts of things into like conventional systems that maybe don't necessarily or like aren't really open to new ideas. So I guess I'm just going to reflect more on how we can kind of approach those sorts of changes within the framework of the existing systems.
Okay, I need to do a reflection. I'm sticking with the optimism that I think that it is still important, even though there's plenty of failing going on in our school systems, that for the most part they actually do a pretty decent job. We do a lot of things worse for sure in America than we do our learning. For instance, our policing. That's got a lot to change. That said, I think that it is important that at least everyone recognizes that learning goes beyond just a classroom. I mean, there is what is captured in the classroom. And as everyone has pointed out, the way we do classroom learning is very much to feed into college, but there is still plenty of learning to be done outside of the classroom. And you guys strike me as much more aware of that than previous generations, where everyone would have said, we do our learning in the classroom. That's everyone is now very aware that learning happens 24/7 across platforms and is increasingly being able to be captured across platforms. So I'm going to say once again, I think we're actually doing okay, and you know, it's slow moving, slow turn, but we are progressing.
My reflection would as I believe your name is Tom. Yes, as what Tom said, we are very hyper aware of learning. I just wasn't aware that our previous generation wasn't so keen to that. And an additional thing would be how important ratios are, the counselor to student ratio, because it seems like they're very stretched out and very exaggerated in many schools that choose to invest in more police or school police on campuses where there's barely any students anymore than counselors.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Tom, I really appreciated your perspective here. I think that's why it's great that we're starting to make these more intergenerational, because we're all having a lot of the same lived experiences. So it's really good to have that perspective. And of course, Gary, you too. But great to have both of you there. So thank you for bringing that up as well.
Yeah, always happy to be the old man.
Well,
This was super fun.
Yeah, I agree. This is like the third one we've done surrounding like school. So we've talked about this a lot. But thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you all at a future trek. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much. Great hanging out with you guys.
Peace.